What is up, everybody? It's Animac here for AnimeUproar, and I'm coming at you live from Europe. Well, technically this is not live, it was definitely pre-recorded, but it is still from Europe. And I know what you must be thinking. Oh look, it's another YouTuber comparing two of the most popular trapped in a game isekai anime and praising Overlord while bashing Sword Art Online. How original. But let me stop you right there. While I do personally prefer Overlord, and I will explain why, I think that SAO has gotten way more hate than it actually deserves, and it is nowhere near the worst anime that I have ever seen. Even though I like Overlord a lot more, in this video I will also talk about one specific issue that I see in Overlord which I think SAO actually handles better. And as a fan of Overlord, and as someone who wants to see this series succeed and reach an even wider audience, I will talk about why this issue might be hurting Overlord and how it could be resolved in the future. But first, let me talk about why I prefer Overlord to SAO. Before getting into the one problem I see with Overlord, it is important to say that Overlord has two specific advantages over SAO and many other isekai anime. Overlord spends a lot more time really focusing on two things that are incredibly important to every good story: world building and strategy. And by the way, if you want to see more Overlord content on this channel, you can leave a like to let me know. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. In SAO, we are introduced to a very interesting virtual world, and personally, I thought that the first episode of SAO was one of the best first episodes in anime, and it absolutely drew me in. But as the series progressed, almost all of the world building we see comes to us from the perspective of Kirito, the blatantly overpowered protagonist. Kirito is an exceptional player who can solve nearly all of his problems with his superior swordsmanship abilities. And while this is explained by the fact that he was one of the 1000 beta testers, so he had more experience with the game when it launched than the average player, it is hard to have good world building in a story where we are almost always following a protagonist who can overcome all challenges by the virtue of his own pure awesomeness. On top of that, because so much attention is given to Kirito and his awesomeness, the initial virtual world of Aincrad cannot sustain the story for long, so the series follows Kirito into different game worlds, including Alfheim and Gun Gale Online. So, instead of fully developing the initial virtual world, we just move on to the next one. And we have to pretend that after the disastrous failure that was the initial SAO game, which resulted in literally thousands of people dying, it still makes perfect sense to keep introducing and playing more games that work in an extremely similar way as the deadly original. And because of the fact that we have to keep moving into different worlds just to find new challenges for the incredible king among men that is Kirito, the vast majority of the side characters are only relevant for a few episodes before being absorbed into Kirito's shadow harem of irrelevancy once a new arc comes along and their presence is no longer needed. Lisbeth, the blacksmith, is important for a few episodes of the Aincrad arc before being swept aside for Asuna. Lifa, the kinky cousin, is the main female protagonist in the Alfheim arc before fading into obscurity once that arc ends. And Sinon is the main female character in Gun Gale Online, but she predictably becomes just a background extra once Kirito lightsabers the crap out of all the bad guys in that world. And I guess Silica was a thing at some point, maybe? Anyway, you catch my drift. And while I realize that some of these characters will play significant roles in the upcoming Alicization arc, that doesn't change the fact that they were swept aside for large periods of the story after initially being extremely important. And in stark contrast to SAO, Overlord spends a lot of time on building the one fantasy world that is introduced to us in the beginning. And Overlord goes to great lengths to introduce a large number of secondary characters who have their own unique personalities, backstories, and motivations. The main protagonist, Ainzul Gon, is definitely overpowered, and in that way we can say that he is pretty similar to Kirito. But unlike Kirito, who seems to be able to solve all of his problems with a good sword fight, Ainz finds himself in a much more complex situation. even though in reality he is just an ordinary Japanese salaryman with no experience ruling or being a leader. From the very beginning, Ainz finds himself in a situation where he has to pretend to be an all-powerful and tactically brilliant ruler and conqueror. As soon as he becomes trapped inside the game he loved to play, Ainz finds himself being worshipped by the floor guardians and other inhabitants of the Great Tomb of Nazarick. As the only supreme being who hasn't abandoned them, the residents of Nazarick see Ainz as a godly presence, someone who is all-powerful and also a tactical genius. Someone who never makes mistakes and always knows what's best for everyone. They all have such massive expectations of Ainz, and he has to do his best to live up to all of them despite the fact that he is not really some sort of supreme being. Instead, he is just an ordinary Japanese man who happens to love fantasy-based games. On top of needing to appear to be all-powerful and all-knowing despite being anything but, Ainz has to deal with the fact that although the world he is trapped in is similar to the world of the game that he loved to play, it is not the same world. There are many unknowns here, things that Ainz has no way of knowing or understanding. So he is forced to slowly explore this new world and learn more about it, while at the same time pretending to have some master plan for world domination up his sleeve. Ainz knows that if he was somehow transported into this game world, then it is possible that another player from the game might have been transported there as well, maybe even multiple other players. This means that there could be other incredibly powerful creatures like himself hiding away somewhere in this new world. And although the vast majority of the creatures that live in this world are no match for Ainz's power, there is always a possibility that someone out there is as powerful or even more powerful than Ainz. This means that Ainz has to be careful. He cannot simply go out and announce his intentions to the world. And he cannot simply try to subdue everyone by force because he still doesn't know what type of enemy he will ultimately be up against. In the climax of Season 1, Ainz is forced to fight Shaltir, whose mind is being controlled by a mysterious enemy. An enemy who has the ability to use world items. This important part of the story emphasizes that there are still unknown threats out there that perhaps even Ainz, as overpowered as he is, may not be able to overcome, so he has to be careful and cautious. Related to that, politics and strategy are a crucial aspect of Overlord, whereas they are clearly not the central theme in SAO by any stretch of the imagination. As someone who has studied politics and international relations for many years, I actually love this aspect of Overlord, and it is one of the reasons why I truly appreciate this show. Being an overlord and ruling over people and lands is not an easy task, especially if you're just a normal salaryman who has been thrust into such an unfamiliar situation. Even if you have a lot of power, as Ainz and the other residents of Nazarick certainly do, pure power alone is not enough to rule the world. In episode 9 of season 3, Ainz explains to the Guardians that ruling through absolute power would be easy, but that method creates too many enemies. It helps to think of this in terms of international relations. Even if one country had by far the strongest army in the world, it would still be foolish for this powerful country to wage war against every other country in the world at the same time. No matter how strong you are on your own, if you make too many enemies, and if you attack without knowing your enemy well and without knowing all the tricks they may be hiding up their sleeves, you are heading for disaster. Ainz is fully aware of this, and he has to walk an incredibly fine line between keeping up appearances as this brilliant and unstoppable conqueror, while attempting to learn more about this mysterious world that he finds himself in. Sometimes he has to be cruel and ruthless to keep his enemies on the run and to keep up his reputation with the Guardians. And other times he has to show mercy so as not to make too many enemies. So unlike Kirito, Ainz cannot solve all of his problems with a sword fight. He has to grapple with politics, strategy, and international relations. And all of this makes the world of Overlord much more complex than the world of SAO and much more similar to the real world. In addition, the fact that Ainz's character in the game is supposed to be evil, a member of the undead, adds further nuance to his character. On the inside, he is just an ordinary human, but on the outside, he is a powerful undead sorcerer who is expected to see humans as inferior beings, as mere prey, for him and his kind. Because of this, Ainz finds himself forced to sometimes do things that we would consider evil under normal circumstances. And it is fascinating to see Ainz navigating through these difficult situations. But Kirito doesn't have such dilemmas. He is generally a calm and cool badass who always does the right thing and saves the day. Kirito also faces emotional dilemmas, to be sure, but these are definitely not on the same level or scale as the dilemmas that Ainz has to deal with. It is this attention to detail in terms of world building and strategy, as well as the complexities of Ainz's character, that make Overlord a far superior series to SAO in my opinion. But I have to be honest here and say that Overlord does have one important issue. And it is an issue that SAO actually tackles more successfully than Overlord. And the reason why I bring up this problem is not because I want to bash Overlord. As a fan of the series, I most certainly don't want to do that. But I bring this up because I feel that this problem may prevent more people from getting into this series in the future. The problem that I am talking about is the fact that Overlord's detailed world building sometimes goes too far. Too many side characters are constantly being introduced to the point that it is impossible to keep up with all of them, and to the point that we don't get to see Ainz and the main cast from Nazarick often enough. To be clear, the side characters in Overlord are not like the side characters in SAO. By and large, they are not one-dimensional, and time is spent actually developing these characters and their personalities. What's more, all of these characters serve some purpose in the greater story, so they are not throwaway characters. And while this is usually a good thing, in Overlord there are just too many side characters. The Swords of Darkness, the Lizard Men, the Blue Roses, the people in Carne Village, all the nobles in Riestes, Foresight, the Emperor of the Baharuth Empire and all the people around him, and so on and so on. I mean, can anyone even keep track of all of these people's names? I certainly can't, and I doubt any casual fan can either unless they keep looking up all the characters online. I mean, just look at the Gilgamesh wannabe emperor dude. His name is Jirkniv Rune Farlord El Nix. Yeah, do you think I remembered any part of that when I was watching him on screen? Definitely not. I only learned his name when I had to look it up for this video. On top of that, I couldn't care less about him as a character. This is literally my face when I see him appear on screen. This is a problem because the strength of Overlord is how great Ainz is as a lead character. And yet, so much time is spent focusing on side characters, many of whom just end up dying a few episodes later, instead of focusing on the characters of Ainz and his relationship with the Guardians of Nazarick, which is what I want to see a lot more of. I mean, even if you're a diehard fan of all things Overlord, you love everything about it, I think we can all agree that we need to see more of Ainz and less of Emperor Discount Gilgamesh. I know that all of these side characters do play a role in the story. They are not just throwaways, but spending so much time on side characters and side stories hurts the pacing of the show. And casual fans looking to get into Overlord will find it extremely difficult to keep up with all of these dozens and dozens of side characters from various villages and kingdoms and empires. And this might eventually turn them off from the series. I myself am a published writer of fiction, and one of the most common criticisms that a writer can receive is that his or her story has too many characters. And because of this, it is hard to keep track of all of them. Your editors will often suggest focusing the story on a smaller group of characters or blending multiple similar characters into a single character. I think that Overlord definitely suffers from this problem, too many side characters taking up too much time in the story. And ultimately this hurts the pacing and takes the focus away from the characters that we are really interested in, like Ainz. SAO does a terrible job of making its side characters important to the story, and most of them end up being throwaway characters that don't serve a significant purpose. But the people who do love SAO love it for Kirito, the protagonist, and they watch it because they want to see Kirito being awesome. The creators of SAO are fully aware of this, and in this regard they deliver. They give us all the Kirito badassery that we can handle, and the fans who are into that really love it. The one story arc which shifts away from that is Mother's Rosario, although this is technically not even an actual arc, but just a side story. This story shifts the focus to Asuna and some of the new friends she meets in New Aincrad. A lot of people have praised this side story for changing things up and finally giving some of the other characters time to shine. But to me personally, this side story felt incredibly contrived. We are suddenly introduced to a bunch of new characters who are part of a guild known as the Sleeping Knights, and we are expected to instantly care about them. But it was all way too fast. The characters received almost no development apart from Yuki, and I just did not feel any sort of attachment to these random people who suddenly become Asuna's BFFs overnight. And this is what I'm afraid will happen to Overlord if we keep going down the road of dozens of new characters constantly being introduced and the story gravitating towards them for episodes on end, instead of focusing on the main characters we love and want to learn more about, like Ainz and the Guardians. Overlord is without a doubt the far superior series to SAO in my opinion, but it is not perfect and I am not one of those people who will pretend that it is. If there is one thing that Overlord can learn from SAO, it is that more attention must be given to the main characters, especially when they are as interesting as the main cast of Overlord. I want more Ainz, more Albedo, more Shaltir, more Aura and Mare, and more Pandora's actor for the love of... But anyway, let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with me about Overlord and the need to put a stronger focus on the main cast, even though the world building and strategy of the series still place it leaps ahead of SAO in my opinion? Or are you fine with the way things are? Or maybe you actually like SAO more than Overlord? Let me know down below. If you enjoy this type of content and you want to see more Overlord videos here on the channel, you can leave a like to let me know. And if you happen to be new, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You can also hit us up on Twitter and Instagram at AnimeUproar if you want to give us suggestions for future videos. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see ya, Space Cowboys!